Okay folks, we need to talk about Steve Rannazzisi, because this guy's story is not what you think. Now we all know Steve lied about being in the World Trade Center on the morning of September 11th to impress Andrew Dice Clay's step-friend, but finally the reason why he did it is coming out. And in truth, it's shocking people fell for Steve's story in the first place, claiming he jumped from the roof of World Trade Center 1 using his suit jacket as a parachute. And in retrospect, the story is obviously a lie, but the public at the time bought it entirely. And apparently the truth is that Steve wanted to be associated with 9/11 for his own safety. Now this is about to get weird, so buckle up. So Steve Rannazzisi's last name is actually Raytheon, and he's the youngest son of Raymond Raytheon, owner of the Raytheon company that develops and manufactures advanced weapon systems for the military, government, and commercial customers. Now in Steve's defense, he wanted nothing to do with his powerful family's business, and was a silly guy who just wanted to perform. But Steve's family wouldn't allow for such a low-class occupation. Steve had been schooled in Sweden and spoke 4 languages. They weren't going to allow him to go off and be a clown. So Steve Rannazzisi does something very bold and leaves Pennsylvania, striking off on his own to Los Angeles in the year 2000. And a year later, while at the Comedy Store, Steve hears that Bert Kreischer's dad works for Merrill Lynch, and tries to get in with Bert by claiming he too worked for Merrill Lynch. And that's when Andrew Dice Clay's step-friend joined the conversation, asking Steve if he was working there during the recent attack on New York. Well, we all know the rest of this story. Steve lies and then has to stick with this story about parachuting down from the World Trade Center for many years to come. Now here's where it gets interesting. In truth, Steve was in Los Angeles on September 11th, but he was actually supposed to be on a camping trip on his family's massive estate. And that family estate in Stony Creek, Pennsylvania is exactly where the 3rd plane crashed on September 11th, leaving Steve to believe this was an intended hit on him. Now he wasn't sure if it was his family that had set him up or if he was being targeted by an outside force because of his family's name, but he was of course terrified. And this is partially why he continued to talk about his false 9/11 story. He felt he would be much safer if he was famous and associated with this event, instead of being an unknown Raytheon family member who could easily disappear without anyone ever knowing. So apparently Steve uses his 9/11 story to land big-time interviews, launching him into notoriety. And this even landed him his first real gig on the show Punk'd, after Ashton Kutcher realized it would be great publicity to have a 9/11 survivor scare celebrities. Any celebrity who lost their cool would be informed that Steve was a 9/11 survivor, which would immediately shut them up. And everyone knows Punk'd is where Steve met Dax Shepard and encouraged him to steal his friend's podcast idea. And this is also where Steve met his longtime girlfriend, singer of the female rock outfit The Donnas, Brett Anderson. So now Steve is on the rise in Hollywood, and after a few more roles, he lands a bigger spot on a show called The Lead. And this is a pivotal moment for Steve, because so far, technically, he's made it on his own. He might have been a liar, but he never used his powerful family to get where he was. But apparently, after working with Nick Kroll for a couple seasons of The League, Steve saw a new path. And everyone knows Nick Kroll grew up rich, it's no secret, and he's managed to maintain comedic credibility even so. So Nick is the one who talks Steve into rejoining his rich family and essentially playing ball. Nick was able to coach him into seeing things differently. In fact, his method was to not see things at all. Nick told Steve that being rich and ruthless was nothing to be ashamed of, and that he should actually feel guilty for not utilizing this blessing. So apparently the now famous Steve does indeed make up with his Raytheon family, and from the outside it would seem to be a good thing. But this was also the same time that Steve dumped his longtime girlfriend and disappeared for 3 months, claiming he was making amends with his family. Now that wouldn't be so strange if there weren't these records of Steve flying to Syria and returning back 3 months later. And while some claim he's clearly doing undercover work, others speculate whatever he's doing, he's only doing it because he wants to keep performing. As a drastically rich person, you have to admit, he must actually love performing to continue on at this point. But sadly, Steve never really understood comedy to begin with. Steve thought that comedy was when you lie and then people laugh. And that's actually what caused the 2014 elevator beatdown of rapper Jay-Z by Solange Knowles. See, apparently Steve thought it would be funny to tell Solange Knowles at the MTV Movie Awards after party that he just saw Jay-Z kissing someone other than Beyonce. Now this was an outright lie, but again, Steve doesn't understand comedy, so he expected her to laugh. Well, we all know what happened instead. And once Steve had rejoined his powerful family, there was no longer a need to audition for a role. The Raytheon family member was now so known in the industry that he could waltz onto any set he wanted and take over. That's how he landed on Curb Your Enthusiasm in 2017, much to the chagrin of Larry David. And you might remember in 2018 when Steve was back in the headlines for wanting to play Harvey Weinstein in what he called a fair depiction, even going so far as to write a first draft of a script himself. And apparently this script was disturbing, not only for attempting to make Harvey Weinstein out as a victim, but for including multiple scenes where someone was forced to ingest human excrement. Now, needless to say, this script was entirely passed on, but gave us a window into the mind of Rannazzisi. And there's plenty more about this guy out there, including his plan to grow an entire new body for himself by 2026. And with the power of his family, this is most likely possible. But for now, Steve Rannazzisi, you're a total bitch. Okay, TB Nation, we're starting to pick up steam, but many people are threatening to tear us down. So rally together for the truth, the TB truth.